Following the news that Rob Grant is releasing a new Red Dwarf novel called Titan, I thought it might be interesting to take a look back at the very first Red Dwarf novel, Infinity Welcomes Careful Drivers, which I haven't read in decades. It was released 35 years ago in 1989, and like the series, is written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. The first thing you notice is how long it takes the book to actually get to Red Dwarf. It would have been easy for them to just patch together a novel by stringing together a bunch of scripts, which is basically how Douglas Adams wrote the first Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book. Instead, it starts by fleshing out the world that the characters come from, which the TV show rarely goes into. It's 3 chapters before we meet Lister and Rimmer, and 9 before they get to Red Dwarf. The additional material is not exactly top tier, but it's interesting all the same. Lister is introduced driving a cab on Saturn's moon, Mimas, having somehow gotten there after an epic pub crawl in Liverpool. He'd woken up slumped across a table in the McDonald's burger bar on Mimas, wearing a lady's pink crippling hat and a pair of yellow fishing waders, with no money and a passport in the name of Emily Birkenstein. What was more, he had a worrying rash. He was broke, diseased, and 793 million miles from Liverpool. When Lister got drunk, he really got drunk. And Rimmer is introduced going to an android brothel, with only a false moustache to project his identity. It's all a bit crass and obvious, particularly the bit about the android sheep. There's also a subplot with the ship's holograms, Saunders and McIntyre, which doesn't really go anywhere. But it does flesh out the whole idea of holograms, as well as such things as stasis booths and better than life, so they are already established when the main characters encounter them later in the book. Once Lister does make it onto Red Dwarf, they take full advantage of the written word to depict it as they would in a multi-million-dollar movie. The drive room is enormous, with hundreds of crew working at any one time, and Holly's monitor screen is the size of a football pitch. We get a great scene with Rimmer meeting his new recruits. Sir? Yes, Lister? Is it possible to get a transfer to another shift, sir? Why? Well, with respect, sir, I think you're mentally unstable. Sit down. Rimmer shook his head. There's always one, isn't there? One wag, one clown, one imbecile. Yes, sir, Lister agreed. But he's not usually in charge, sir. And then the ship sets off into deep space. Lister's relationship with Kachansky is the biggest change in this part. In the show, he barely talks to her before her death. In the book, they have a relationship that lasts just over a month, until she dumps him and she goes back to her ex. She still doesn't have much of a personality, but it's a much more grown-up situation than the unattainable crush she was in the first 2 seasons. And the show does end up retroactively changing the backstory to say that this also happened there as well. Rimmer is also fleshed out with a lengthy section about his past. That spent 3 pages going on about his revision timetables, which is another indication that the target audience was probably teenage boys. It's not until page 82 that the book starts to cover the events of the pilot, and by then Lister and Rimmer's relationship has already been thoroughly established, so they can go straight to the captain finding out about Lister's cat. The captain here is not Hollister, but a woman with the unfortunate name of Kirk. It's a nice nod to quality, but she's only in 1 scene, so it doesn't make much difference. From there, the events of the pilot play out, with Lister put in stasis shortly before the crew were wiped out. This time round, it's not Rimmer's fault, which is a big change, as his guilt over being responsible for the deaths of millions is a big part of his character in the show. Maybe the writers thought better of it and wanted to let him off. Instead, he's just about to step into a stasis booth when the radiation leak happens, which is ironic, but that's about all. The rest of the pilot plays out as in the show, with the classic Everybody's Dead Dave scene, except that Cat's introduction is left until a lot later, which makes sense as it was basically shoehorned into the first episode. Instead, the Cat's introduction happens during the events of Future Echoes, which helps to extend it to 50 pages. It's one of the better episodes of the first series, so it makes sense to reproduce it basically scene for scene. Along the way, it also gives you some of the Cat's backstory from Waiting for God, only without the Cat Priest. Instead, they visit a massive cat city, which would have been impossible to realise on screen at the time. After Future Echoes, the book basically skips the rest of Season 1, and launches straight into the Season 2 opener, Crichton. It starts with an additional scene on board the Nova 5, where we meet Crichton and his female crew, coming straight after the section where Lister learns about his future children. Any unsuspecting readers will naturally assume that one of Crichton's women will turn out to be the mother, so the reveal that they are all actually dead will hit them quite differently. Some of the funniest scenes in the series are here, with the whole bit about dog's milk, and the scene of the crew going on the pull. But it does stop short of including the ending where Crichton goes off and rebels, which is possibly the weakest part of the episode. Instead, we get the events of the first season finale, Me Squared, which plays out over the next 50 pages. And where they took only a few days in the show, here they are stretched out for months, including an extended interlude where Lister, Crichton and the cat do some mining. Or rather, Lister does some mining and Crichton and the cat do very little. This prolongs Rimmer's torture at the hands of his double and makes his anguish a lot more believable. So scenes that were played for laughs in the show become generally psychologically harrowing. The final section is again new material, though it is based around the idea of Better Than Life from Season 2. But where that episode was mostly played for laughs, as a parody of virtual reality, and possibly the holodeck episodes from Star Trek The Next Generation, the game in the book is far more insidious, giving people their every fantasy so they never want to leave. Lister gets to settle down with Kachansky, Rimmer becomes a rich and powerful businessman with a beautiful wife, and Kat, well... They stood before the roaring fire in the vast Inglenook fireplace of the Cat's baronial dining hall, drinking hot milk laced with cinnamon from pewter mugs. The cat stood, a spat-covered foot resting on the gold fender, his elbow crooked above his head on the marble mantelpiece, shaking his head, staring into the fire. "You mean none of this is real? None of this actually exists?" "Of course it doesn't," Rimmer snorted in disgust. "Fire-breathing yaks, 8-foot-tall Nordic goddesses, a castle surrounded by a moat of milk. Is any of it even remotely tinged with credibility? I don't understand how you can even believe it was." Lister thought of the Rimmer buildings, Paris, New York and London, but he didn't say anything. "I mean," Rimmer shook his head, "at least our fantasies were possible. Perhaps not likely, but possible. But yours is just totally preposterous. It's like a gothic fairy tale. How come you didn't suspect anything? Didn't you think it was a little bit odd the way you just acquired all this?" "No, I just thought I deserved it." "Deserved it?" Lister tilted his head. "Because I'm so good looking." But the book ends on a cliffhanger, as the crew decide to stay in the game. And most of the next book is set there as well. So clearly the writers knew there was a lot more potential in the idea, and they were just scratching the surface with this one. So how does the book hold up in 2024? Well, there are a few dated 80s references, like DAT tapes and Tipex, but then the show itself is full of such references, like Kevin Keegan and Bernie Innes, so it has to be expected. The female characters are all basically one-dimensional objects of lust, which is not great and probably wouldn't fly today. But again, there were no regular female characters in the first 2 seasons of the show, so this is really just more of the same. For fans of the show, all the main characters get a lot more background. Lister and Rimmer's histories are explored in the opening section. Holly gets a good few sections exploring his viewpoint, which allows the writers to incorporate many of his best jokes from the series. Cat is still the same one-dimensional character he was at the start of the series, hopelessly vain and obsessed with food and sleep. But then he never really grew beyond that in the show, apart from becoming the stupid one. And Crichton here is made a member of the crew for the first time, as this was written before the show brought him back in Season 3. They're still clearly trying to work out how the character would work on an ongoing basis, as he struggles to do anything more productive than cleaning. It's an interesting insight into what could have been had the original Crichton stuck around. So it's not perfect, but it is an interesting expansion of the Red Dwarf lore, and would have been a solid template for a Red Dwarf movie, had they made one back in the 90s. Later in the year I will definitely be carrying on and doing a reread of the sequel, Better Than Life, which I don't remember much about, apart from all the incest, which is enough to explain why I haven't read it in years. So please like or subscribe if you're interested in more videos like this, and I'll see you next time.